Hi, Year 12. I'm going to go through the end of this essay pretty quickly, because I think we've gotten to the best bits already. He does tend to repeat some of that in the end. There are still some useful things at the rest of this, but I'll try and. We've only got a couple of pages. I may as well do it quickly. If possible, I'll try and get up in the air and out of space from this solar system, which isn't very good. I don't like it very much. I'm kind of sick of it. So we'll see if we can do that while I read through the last few pages quite quickly. I'm going to skip ahead. We were reading, look back through this essay, and for certain you will find that I've again and again committed the very faults I'm protesting against. Forget that stuff. Forget how frustrating that might be. There is a simile in that paragraph. He says, and yet his words like cavalry horses answering the bugle. I highlighted that, but we've talked about his similes and the way he uses them enough. So we're just going to start at the next paragraph where he says, I said earlier that the decadence of our language is probably curable. Those who deny this would argue, if they produced an argument at all, that language merely reflects existing social conditions and that we cannot influence its development by any direct tinkering with words and constructions. I did a little bit of extra base building, by the way. I couldn't help myself but put an extra level and a save point in there. I'll probably never come back, and I certainly won't spend time doing much more base building, but for your reference, that's how it did. I wonder if I can take this with me. Yeah, not sure. No, not removable. Anyway, so far as the general tone or spirit as a language goes, this may be true. I think my idea now, I have to go back up to the space station. There's a mysterious signal to investigate. 16, 16, 16, 16. So I'm just going to hop up in the spaceship and figure that out. But it is not true in detail. Silly words and expressions have often disappeared, not through any evolutionary process, but owing to the conscious actions of a minority. Two recent examples were explore every avenue and leave no stone unturned, which were killed by the jeers of a few journalists. We've got the benefit of hindsight here. Those words were not killed. Those phrases or turns of phrase were not killed. We still have them. So, from our benefit of retrospect, maybe you can't. Maybe part of the heart of his essay is proved untrue by time. That, sometimes these cliches just continue to be useful to people. That's why they're repeated. I'm not sure. Is that a serious failing of this essay? It's a failing. I don't think it's a serious failing because it still stands up for other reasons, but keep that in mind. There's a long list of fly-blown metaphors which could similarly be got rid of if enough people would interest themselves in the job, and it should also be possible to laugh the not-un formation out of existence. There's a footnote here. One can cure oneself of the not-un formation by memorizing this sentence. A not-un-black dog was chasing a not-un-small rabbit across a not-un-green field. No one's going to write like that. That's ridiculous. And, he's parodying how it could be used and why it's so stupid. But, in one way, the sentence still has meaning, and we still kind of get the point. It's just a silly way to write it. Does it represent the worst crimes of political language being misused? I don't think so. What you do see in that quote, though, is the origins of 1984 and Newspeak. Because that is kind of what Newspeak does. It limits the vocabulary and just uses suffixes to change meaning, which itself is a limiting of ideology. The idea in 1984 is that language is diminished so much that people don't have important concepts in their vocabulary, so they can't conceive them. Perhaps this is the origin of that form of writing. To reduce the amount of Latin and Greek in the average sentence, to drive out foreign phrases and strayed scientific words, and in general to make pretentiousness unfashionable. But all these are minor points. The defense of the English language implies more than this. And perhaps it is best to start by saying what it does not imply. I think I just need to talk to as many guys here until one of them gives me the code. There's a few things you can do in the space station. There's a terminal there, you can sell stuff. I don't think I have anything to sell. Perhaps, actually. Perhaps I do have something worth selling from my Starship inventory. I could potentially sell... Nope. 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 No, nothing. The game actually has quite an interesting economy. Different systems have different, strengths and weaknesses. From a manufacturing facility, you can buy their kind of manufacturing offcuts and then sell it to highly technology advanced systems where they need it for their technology and stuff like that. So you can actually start a little trade route, which is really cool. I like it. Did I talk to this guy already? No. This is the one. We are watching you, traveler friend. Find what we have left you. He'll give me some coordinates. Almost every problem in this game is solved by getting coordinates, or at least, but that's fine. I like traveling. To begin with, it has nothing to do with archaism, with the salvaging of obsolete words and turns of speech, or with the setting up of a standard English, which must never be departed from. On the contrary, you can buy these ships, but they're way too expensive. I have no money. I've got barely anything. On the contrary, it is especially concerned with the scrapping of every word or idiom which has outworn its usefulness. And they're kind of similar points in a lot of ways. Okay, we got to go back to Regeneros. I was hoping to go back down there, but Regeneros should be okay. It has nothing to do with correct grammar and syntax, which are of no importance so long as one makes one's meaning clear. And we can see this. We can see how this works. When you look at Colum McCann's piece we've been talking about in class, he breaks grammar and has these long run-on sentences, which are really on the edge of how syntax could work to make meaning. But because these run-ons are series of images, really strong images, the clarity is there. Anyway. So it's fine. Likewise, there's a book by Peter Carey called True History of the Kelly Gang. It's a brilliant book. I highly recommend it. It's written in the kind of grammatically poor style of an Irish immigrant, or a lower class guy in the 1800s. And while it breaks the rules of grammar, completely, the prose style is so good, the prose is so good, and the imagery is so strong that he gets away with it. Very much gets away with it. Or with the which are of no importance so long as one makes one's meaning clear. Or with the avoidance of Americanisms, or with having what is called a good prose style, though that definitely helps. On the other hand, it is not concerned with fake simplicity and the attempt to make written English colloquial. You don't need to dumb it down. He's not asking people to just dumb it down, as if your reader is an idiot. That's not the point. But the point is to make your meaning clear. Now it's going to be very good. Sorry about this. I'm at a point where I need to read. There we go. Whoa. What? Survive my rockets? What about my cannons? Eh? nor does it even imply in every case preferring the Saxon word to the Latin one, though it does imply using the fewest and shortest words that will cover one's meaning. What is above all needed is to let the meaning choose the word and not the other way about. Now this is one of the sole points of like positive, I suppose, positive advice that he has. Whoa, this is cool. So I've got two things next to each other. One's a crashed freighter, which is where I'm meant to be going, and the other one is a trading post, which is super useful because it's safe and there's lots of landing pads and it's nearby, so I can just bide my time in there. This is one of his only positive points of advice. Much of the ending of this is frustrating because he tells us only what not to do. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. It's him being crotchety and embittered. But he does give this positive advice, I suppose. Let the meaning choose the word and not the other way about. In prose, the worst thing one can do with words is to surrender to them. I'm sure that's meant to say surrender to them, although my one has a typo and it's not there. For you guys, this manifests as using a thesaurus as opposed to just, you know, writing the word and the meaning that you have. You know, this is the worst case scenario where you're using words you're not quite sure of. Every word has its own origin, etymology, and meaning. You know, it's really important to consider that when you're using a word and you're finding the right word, as opposed to just surrendering to the words by using ones that aren't quite right but sound fancy. When you think of a concrete object, you think wordlessly, and then if you want to describe the thing you have been visualizing, you probably hunt about till you find the exact words that seem to fit it. When you think of something abstract, you're more inclined to use words from the start, and unless you make a conscious effort to prevent it, the existing dialect will come rushing in and do the job for you at the expense of blurring or even changing your meaning. Probably it is better to put off using words as long as possible and get one's meaning as clear as one can simply through pictures or sensations. Now, is this even possible? You know, when you're writing an argument, I'm not sure it is. Is it possible when you're writing prose fiction? You know, start with the image. That's what Colum McCann suggested. Before you've even kind of started to make abstract points, you start with the image. And even if you're, you know, thinking visually first, even if you're then jotting it down not as a literal image but as a written image, perhaps that's the best way to start. Perhaps for you guys that's the best way to start. Okay, hyperdrive blueprint. Now this is really handy, and it's also handy that I'm near the trading post because I can always cop out and just trade for the stuff I need rather than harvest it. You know, if I'm patient enough, and I can get back in alive. If I can get back alive. Is it even possible to start with an image? In some cases, depending on what you write, maybe. Afterwards, one can choose, not simply accept the phrases that will best cover the meaning, and then switch round and decide what impressions one's words are likely to make on another person. This last effort of the mind cuts out all stale or mixed images, all prefabricated phrases, needless repetitions, and humbug and vagueness generally. But one can often be in doubt about the effect of a word or a phrase, and one needs rules that one can rely on when instinct fails. I think the following rules will cover most cases. And again, it's quite telling that most of his rules that he provides here are rules about what not to do rather than rules about what to do. However, you know, they can still be useful. Probably not for you guys as a set of rules. I don't think these are quite as useful as the questions he had, the questions for writers. You know, can I put it more clearly, things like that. But they're similar, and in a lot of ways, maybe they can be useful too. So I'll read through them. Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. Never use a long word where a short one will do. If it is possible to cut a word out, Always cut it out. Never use the passive voice where you can use the active. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Break any of these rules sooner than say anything barbarous. I think all those rules are self-explanatory based on what we've gone through. He's summing it up here. You could reflect on those rules. Personally, I kind of like the previous ones a little bit better. Again, his questions for writers. But if you want to use them, they're very quick, concise ways, probably easily memorable. So that you can reflect on them, but don't dwell too much. I don't think, it's good advice. Cut out words that aren't necessary. Use short words where possible. Don't use the passive voice unless you need to. These rules sound elementary, and so they are, but demand a deep change of attitude in anyone who has grown used to writing in the style now fashionable. What is the style now fashionable? I don't know. He's talking about the context of political writing in the 40s. Is that context still around? I'm not sure. Don't think so. But for you guys, even just the high school essay writing it suffers all the same flaws of vagueness. So it's still a useful points of advice. Writing hasn't got that much better, at least in terms of your context. One could keep all of them and still write bad English, but one could not write the kind of stuff that I quoted in these 5 specimens at the beginning of the article. I have not here been considering the literary use of language, but merely language as an instrument for expressing and not for concealing or preventing thought. Is there even such thing as literary language? Some would argue there's not. No such thing as literary language. I actually went to uni and did a master's degree all about literary theory like this, and I would say that there is. For me, literary language is language that, avoids evoking big abstract ideas, but rather dramatizes it. Instead of using the word grief in a story about grief, you're showing grief play out between characters, and because we're not given that simplifying label grief, the emotion or the feeling of experiencing that becomes stronger because we're not diminishing it to a label. He's saying it doesn't apply to that, but I think everything he's said about being concrete, that kind of resonates with what I would consider literary language. So I think he's selling himself short a little bit there. Stuart Chase and others have come near to claiming that all abstract words are meaningless. I need to buy some copper or something, if possible, to refine to... Oh, I can just straight up buy chromatic metal, but I can't afford it. Maybe I can sell. Yeah, let's just get through the end of this, huh? I'm not going to be able to get this thing crafted. All abstract words are meaningless and have used this as a pretext for advocating a kind of political quietism. Since you don't know what fascism is, how can you struggle against fascism? One need not swallow such absurdities as this, but one ought to recognize that the present political chaos is connected with the decay of language, and that one can probably bring about some improvement by starting at the verbal end. Are we in political chaos? I don't know. I'm not going to go that far. It's interesting to write about if you feel that we are. Stuff like social media, I think, is driven by poor political language, and that's really changing the political landscape. So maybe that point still remains, as true as ever. And that one can probably bring about some improvement by starting at the verbal end. If you simplify your English, you are freed from the worst follies of orthodoxy. You cannot speak any of the necessary dialects, and when you make a stupid remark, its stupidity will be obvious, even to yourself. Political language, and with variations this is true of all political parties, from conservatives to anarchists, is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. I really like that last part, and it shows he's returning to his strongest point. And the strongest parts of this were those ideas that without concrete language, you're going to dehumanize. You're not going to have the humanizing factor that enables politics to mask things like, murder. Lies sounding respectable. Lies sound truthful and murder respectable. You can only do this by being so vague with your language that there's no humanity to murder. And that was his strongest part, if you remember back to those paragraphs about the way that the political speaker would stand up there with lifeless eyes behind the rims of his glasses, and the murder of individuals like cattle as described under the label of transfer of population. That was his strongest point, and it's really telling and important that he returns to this here at the very end of his essay. One cannot change this all in a moment, but one can at least change one's own habits. And from time to time one can even, if one jeers loudly enough, send some worn out and useless phrase, some jackboot, Achilles heel, hotbed, melting pot, acid test, veritable inferno, or other lump of verbal refuse into the dustbin where it belongs. And there he goes. He ends on the strong concrete image, throwing something into a dustbin in the garbage can. The fact that didn't actually work out, that a lot of these phrases like Achilles heel, for example, they never got thrown in the dustbin, or if they did, someone scooped them back out again. Doesn't say too much for that part of his argument, but the strongest stuff is still recognizable there, I think. And it is that masking of humanity through vague language, and as a crafting writer, it's always best to be concrete so that you humanize, so that you can dramatize, so that we can see the ideas you're talking about playing out on the stage. Alright, well, here I am. I think I might just leave it at that. I've been talking for a while now. I think you guys are probably sick of it. We got through the essay. Will I ever build my hyperdrive and get off this planet? I was hoping to do it, but it's not to be. Maybe we'll have a bonus episode if anyone asks for it. If not, you're probably very happy to see me stop playing No Man's Sky forever. Alright guys, thanks heaps for listening. Hope that helps. Get writing.